supposed to protect the national elections. So what can we draw from this? Look, it could be a mere budget, personal budget situation where the private sector, as always, is offering more money than the Bureau can, but seldom do we see people leave 2 years before retirement. So what else can we draw from it? There may be, just reading into this in conjecture, there may be a level of frustration with his mission, his ability to execute what he wants to, and he sees greener pastures outside the government than inside it.
All right, Frank, thank you. Jeremy Bash, among those watching. We should tell our audience that we have just been told we're within the 2-minute warning start time. So there is the door through which the leaders will be entering. We think we have about a minute to 90 seconds left. Andrea Mitchell, everything will be watched now from the way they walk in. If there's any kind of physical deference, if there's anyone laughing at the jokes of the other, and particularly, let's all pay attention to Vladimir Putin's understanding of Donald Trump's comments in real time, because as a veteran intelligence official, he has spoken English since he was a young man.
I've actually seen video of him speaking English on a promotional video to try to get the Olympics to Russia. So I know he speaks English, not just reading it off a teleprompter. And yes, he speaks English, and he was the KGB officer on the east side of that Berlin Wall for many, many decades, which makes the president's attacks on Germany and Angela Merkel even more painful to her. Leading up to this summit, we're going to be watching everything as they come in, including whom they call upon, because the president has a penchant for calling upon reporters whom he believes will be more friendly. And he has, as we've been discussing, gone into the summit with a tweet labeling the rest of us the fake media and speaking about journalists as being enemies of the people, which is particularly offensive since it is the kind of phrase that Joe Stalin used to use. So we're going to be rooting for our own team in there, Hallie Jackson and Kelly O'Donnell, to get questions. That is not always possible, given that the whole world is watching, and they have a lot of people to choose from, both on the Russian side and, of course, on the American side. But this is a pretty high stakes, as high as it could be, I think, for President Trump in particular, in that people want to know, is he going to include anything in his opening statement regarding the Russian attack on the U.S. election? Or how will he handle that if it doesn't get mentioned in the opening statement? How will he handle it in answer to questions? You know he's going to be asked about it if he calls upon anyone from the independent media.
Andrea, I'm told it'll be Putin who will give prepared statement first, since they are technically the host nation, home team status here. Our camera is locked on this doorway. I have to say, Andrea, coming up on 6 o'clock at night, it looks like where you are is one of those stunningly beautiful, still bright till late in the evening, northern European summer nights.
Indeed, the sunset, such as it is, because it's never pitch black, is about 10:30 at night. So we are blessed with this climate. Our last summit, when we were last talking with each other at a summit, was in Singapore, and that was a very different environment, different times then, and it was about 100 degrees. This is glorious. It's warm for Northern Europe, very warm indeed in the 80s, but lovely compared to the climate back home for much of the summer. And it's going to be a beautiful environment for all of us reporting on it late into the night and the early morning as well. Brian, the atmosphere also, the beautiful architecture here in Helsinki mimics some of the architecture that my friend Chris Dickey tells me you would see in St. Petersburg. It's that classic, beautiful 19th century, those structures, and that's the kind of the Hall of States that they're meeting in for this news conference. This is the presidential palace that you're seeing, and we've been watching them at the bilateral lunch, and before that at the one-on-one meeting. The lunch, by the way, was attended by all of the advisors, by Lavrov and Pompeo, by the ambassador to the United States, as well as the U.S. ambassador, John Huntsman. You can hear the bells, the chimes behind me, marking the hour. It's quite a dramatic setting, and it's one that does favor Vladimir Putin from next door. Putin is remarkably unpopular, according to all of the polling in the United States, but less unpopular here in neighboring Finland. Finland is not a member of NATO. They are part of a NATO advisory group, so the Finnish president, whom our president had breakfast with this morning, was indeed in Brussels, but he's not officially a member of NATO because Finland really relishes its non-combatant role, if you will. It is not siding one way or the other, being so close. They have an 800-plus mile border with Russia, and they have to get along with their neighbor.
Brian, Andrea points out that the stakes could not be higher, but they are all at the choice of the President of the United States, much like the summit in Singapore when Trump supporters said there are no other presidents that could get a meeting like this. That wasn't the case. There were no other presidents that would allow a meeting like that with the American flag side by side with the North Korean flag. And again, you just said Vladimir Putin will be the first with prepared remarks. Yep. You're basically on his home turf. And let's put in perspective, the U.S. economy, $22 trillion. The European economy, $19 trillion. The Russian economy, $1 trillion. Why is President Trump putting himself in this vulnerable, high-stakes scenario and letting Vladimir Putin lead?
That's why I keep asking Nick Confessori of the New York Times, tell us what it is, and he's just not giving it up today.
Nuclear power. We have 60,000 weapons. They have 1,600.
Look, America is the greatest power the world has ever seen, and Russia is a fading power. What they want, what Putin wants right now, is to fracture the alliances and trading relationships.
Oh, we've made some progress on that front.
That make this country the most powerful country the world has ever seen. And the president has already given him that halfway. He's just come out of a meeting where he has put shots across the bow of our longtime allies, talked about the G7 in harsh terms, called the EU our foe. It is still astonishing to hear that kind of language when you compare it to the way he has treated Putin, as if Putin is his equal standing leader around the world and a friend instead of an adversary.
Instead of treating him like a threat, which is what he is.
And Andrea, I keep asking questions like couched with, in our lifetime, because it is so striking to hear the word foe used by the American president toward the EU. This is the post-war order. This is the peaceful alignment of nations, many of which were laid waste after the Second World War and have come back as roaring, prosperous economies.
Absolutely. And, you have covered a lot of these summits. I remember going with Ronald Reagan to my first NATO meeting in Bonn, Germany, and Europe was in an uproar over deploying those Pershing missiles, those medium-range missiles. And you had Reagan and Maggie Thatcher on one side, Mitterrand and Pierre Trudeau's father, the current Justin Trudeau's father, on the other side of the alliance. So they were divisions, but they were united against the then Soviet Union. There was no way you could divide NATO between the Western nations and what they faced across the border of NATO. And now you've got a real divide here where the president goes into Quebec and says Russia should be invited back into the G7 despite the annexation of Crimea, the invasion of Ukraine, the attacks by nerve gas or a toxic nerve agent against a former Russian spy in the UK, all of the other grievances that have sanctioned Russia and made Putin basically an outcast from the Western allies. And now the president goes from Quebec then to Singapore and then marches into NATO and criticizes Angela Merkel, criticizes the EU, divides the allies, and undercuts Theresa May, our closest ally in Europe, undercuts her leverage within her own political party. And we have not even seen the end of that being played out. Katty Kay and others who are a lot closer to the British Tories and Labour divide than I am say that it is still touch and go for Theresa May right now as to whether her government survives this meeting that she had with the interview that the President of the United States did with a Rupert Murdoch very widely read tabloid, The Sun.
Andrea, thank you. If we can take the picture of the room full frame, just want to point some stuff out to people. So on the left-hand side of the aisle, that will be the front row occupied by the delegation, pretty much the same number and names of people you saw on the president's side at the table. So among others, Kelly, Bolton, Pompeo. On the other side, the Russian team will take their seats in the front row. All of the seats have available to them headphones to put on while the Russian president is talking. Both presidents will have access to headphones to hear the simultaneous translation as well. There are cameras set up on a small stand so they can get remote pictures without the photographers needing to crouch in the front row. Television cameras are off to the side and on risers in the back of the room. We keep showing the doorway. There is a microphone standing by for an announcer who's going to announce both men. A lot of people at these gatherings, their job is to stand around waiting, and these gentlemen are doing a bang-up job at that. A lot of very, very official-looking standing around and waiting amid briefers and security personnel. Nick, a lot of this just looks the way they look.
Well, look, we are well past the 2-minute warning. I'm not sure what the delay is back there. However, it's clear that we know that the president's meeting with Putin lasted for 2 hours, at least half an hour past the scheduled time. And for a president who doesn't like to do policy briefings or wade into policy books or bone up on details and fly by the seat of his pants, that's a very long meeting. And I would say that a transcript of that meeting is the hottest document in Washington right now. We would all love to know what was said and discussed in that meeting, and perhaps that very interest is why there were no other aides present.
11 o'clock a.m., the hour has just turned. To Nick's point, the meeting went longer than we thought. It could be that both teams have separated and are caucusing with their sides before this press event. It could be that both leaders are getting briefed and prepped and given talking points, depending on what they know that we don't, what happened in that room. Now we have much talking into sleeve microphones by the security guys waiting for the two principals to come in the room. And if, in fact, to Nick's other point, it's just translators who were in that room, as such a difficult job to do simultaneous translating, such a difficult job to then remember what was discussed if you're not note-taking at the same time, nor is it their job to take notes for